Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, for addressing your invitation to me, for making it possible for me to participate in this very interesting event in the Institute of Labor Medicine. This is our institute, a bird's eye view of our buildings. For a number of years, we've been conducting studies on the impact of electromagnetic fields, different frequencies impact on health, mainly workers' health. But as today, there are other risk groups, not only workers, but basically the whole population is covered. For this reason, we decided to expand those studies to other groups. We focus on the whole environment, trying to assess the impact of different frequencies on humans and different human organs, including we did a meta-analysis focusing on cancers related to head carcinomas. This was a meta-analysis. We did not do this study ourselves. In Poland, we have not had such studies done yet, so I'm just going to present a review of different study results from different countries outside Poland. Please note that the electromagnetic fields that are emitted by mobile phones, this is just a small subsection of the different frequencies around. In the United States, it's usually for mobile phones between 850 and 1900 megahertz. In Europe, between 900 and 1800. The traditional analog network, not really very used, but still some impact can be observed. It's 450 megahertz. And now, as we have so many different fields around us, there is more and more interest, and there are more and more fears, public fears, regarding the impact of electromagnetic fields on our health. We've known for years what the impact is, but now there is a very special way in which those fields occur. They're often very close to our brain as a result of mobile phones. So that's very different exposure than professional exposure, where the source of radiation is usually quite distant from human body. While here, as you can see, we've got a source of radiation very close to the head. So there's direct, actually, contact between the transmitter and the head brain. There have been fears, therefore, voiced, and as a result, there have been more and more studies done about trying to find out what the connections are. The first actual case goes back to the United States, 1992. This was a case of David Reynard, actually, who filed a case to the local court saying that the brain tumor in his wife's brain was the consequence of her use of a mobile phone. This has led to a number of different studies conducted. Some of them are experimental studies on animals, some cell-level surveys, some concern humans, two types again, experimental studies and epidemiological studies. I'm not going to go into detail discussing all those different types of studies, as this is not the focus of my presentation today. I'm just going to focus on one type of those studies, epidemiological studies. I'm sorry if I use a too popular, not very scientific language, but I understand not everyone is a specialist here in the conference room, so I will be using quite colloquial language. So epidemiological studies do not focus on mechanisms or causes of illnesses, but they cover a large sample, thinking about possible causes and the results, in this case, results of electromagnetic fields. So, first of all, we observe a certain population or section of this population and try to draw some conclusions from such studies. Then we have case control studies, more detailed ones, as in this case, the focus is on consequences with those who have been exposed, for instance, to radiation, and another group that was not exposed, and we can compare results. Plus the third type, cohort results, we select a certain cohort, the group, for instance, children, and observe them. Either we can take a retrospective approach, seeing what happened in the past and what the consequences are, or prospective approach, so-called follow-up, which is, in my view, the best way to start it, because we can start with an observation still before being exposed to a certain factor, and we can trace what happens later with perhaps more exposure as life goes by. Then what kind of impact of electromagnetic fields should be taken into account for possible tumors? All three types, unfortunately, may be expected. So, first case, de novo cancer, acceleration of already existing cancer. The second situation, or the third case, is a natural process of remission that actually is stopped by being exposed to electromagnetic radiation. We know that our organisms, our bodies possess certain mechanisms to protect itself, but if there's natural protection, the result is weakened, process is weakened, then cancer may grow. Other types of cancers under investigation: glioma, meningioma, all types of brain tumors, salivary gland tumors, acoustic neuroma, vestibular schwannoma, facial nerve neuroma, and uveal melanoma. As not all studies, of course, focus on all those different types of cancers I have mentioned, I've decided to give you this list of different cancers. Here we have results of earlier studies. The idea is just to give you a general background, relative risk estimates for malignant brain cancer. Not very clear. Different authors actually focused on different types of tumors, take into account different elements and the risks of further development for the exposure to mobile phones. One means just general risk, the same as for the general population, but then the higher risk, the higher is the fear, the higher is the certainty that a given type of cancer is actually caused as a result of being exposed to electromagnetic fields. So as you can see, there are some study results confirming such an idea, but others denying actually the risk. In some, as you can see, the risk actually is smaller than the general risk at the level of 1. So now, what can be the reasons for such big variety of test results, study results? One of the largest actually studies that have been conducted in Europe, concerning not only Europe actually, but also other countries, 13 different countries. Interphone project was the name of this test. It was sponsored to a large extent from EU funds. That is why it was considered that it was fully objective. And in most of the cases, published over a number of years, there have been negative results. In other words, no connection was seen between the exposure to mobile phone radiation and growth of cancer. But recently we have had more and more results of studies showing that actually the true level is by about 25% higher than in the Interphone study. So the final analysis of the collected material, actually this analysis was to a large extent sponsored by mobile phone operators. So one may suspect that this is actually the reason why initially no negative impact was observed. Now, what are the objective reasons? Why was it initially very difficult to see whether there was a clear cause and result effect? In order, first of all, to be able to conclude that mobile phones actually cause cancer, you need to be able to assess exposure properly. And here, actually, in those studies, you had such comments as probable or certain use of mobile phones, not very concrete. Or simply some people were actually had phones and paid for the phone. on a regular basis, but they were perhaps not using the phones. We don't know if they were using those phones at all and to what extent. And then there were surveys with people very often ill, people sometimes in a very serious condition. It was difficult in many cases to get from those people very precise answers to questions. And if we were to be asked about how many hours per day we use our mobile phone, speak on the phone, even for us, being healthy perhaps now, we would not be able to answer such questions clearly. And for those sometimes very seriously ill, it was even more difficult. So this assessment of exposure to radiation was a very weak point. Then there was a division between the users of analog and mobile services, but actually the current users of mobile telephones used some time ago certainly analog telephones, and we don't know whether the results observed are these consequences of the use of mobile or analog telephones. Those who are using mobile phones, in some cases they were qualified as users of mobile phones. Others were actually part of the control group, which shows that there was a lack of consistency. And again, as for the group of regular users, we had people using phones at least once per week for at least 6 months. Is it a big exposure once per week? Additionally, in a number of studies, the period of latency was very short. So since the start of the given factor until the beginning of the cancer, so actually the moment when it was confirmed, there were just a few years, but as we know, the development of cancer sometimes takes even 20 years. So we have a look at those who have been using mobile phones for 5 years, for instance. It is too short. We might have no information, but who knows what's going to happen in 15 years. And then yet another feature of this study was that intracranial cancers, as mentioned by the previous speaker from his experience. In the general population, there are not very many such cases in the general population. The studies, the tests that are done are very often, they cover very small groups, which are not convincing, not very convincing also for legislators, because then they might say that if we have just a few cases, it is not really convincing that there is a clear-cut connection. For this reason, the way to be able to collect more observations is what is called meta-analysis. It's a statistical, basically, method. It is about collecting data from a number of different publications that concern the same issue. So we try to collect as many similarities as possible and then to create a meta-analysis, a large cohort of all patients that actually have been studied in France or Great Britain or Poland, other places as well. As a result, we have a very large group of patients observed, and this should give us a more convincing end result. Until we decided to launch our study, before there were 5 other meta-analyses, but they did not give a very clear-cut result, because it would seem that a meta-analysis should give us a clear-cut conclusion, but it was not the case in the previous meta-analyses. So it was our idea to try to undertake yet another meta-analysis. And let me explain the main criteria that had to be fulfilled by the different studies we collected. So first of all, they had to be written in English. As I said, we do not have any Polish study results. They had to be original case-control studies. Some meta-analysis also covered the cohort studies and population studies, while we decided to focus on case-control studies only, those that were published in reviewed medical journals. That should give us good quality until March 2014. Then the so-called odds ratio had to be calculated in those studies, and then exposure to electromagnetic fields had to be described there. although in some cases it was difficult. But as I said, we did not have much choice, so we didn't have other study results that we would have objective approach to the exposure to electromagnetic fields. So actually we have been able to select 22 different study results, and here more information, how large the population was. More than 26,000 cases of different head tumors, more than 50,000 people in the control group. How in practice those publications were conducted? First of all, the exposure to radiation confirmed cases of tumors, and then the patients with no tumor and the exposure in this group. So now let me explain what the results were.
Właściwie wszystkie te nowotwory, które wcześniej wymieniłam.
We have taken into account all the tumors that I have listed before, and we have analyzed the following relationships. All types of mobile phones, all types of tumors, and the use of mobile phones regardless of type. All types of tumors and the use of only analog phones. Gliomas and the use of mobile phones, excluding the type of phone, and meningiomas. Gliomas are, whereas meningiomas are benign, gliomas are much more dangerous. Gliomas are. Then we have oral neuroma and the use of cell phones regardless of type, all types of tumors and the use of mobile phones regardless of type, but a period of usage over 10 years, and then all types of tumors and the use of mobile phones not less than 10 years from starting the regular use. Because in the first one, frequently the period of use of the phone was just the period of subscribing. And the question is whether the people were really using it or they were just subscribers. Whereas here, this was a real usage and regular for over 10 years. All types of tumors and the use of mobile phones, the ipsilateral exposure. Because some people said that they only use the phone by touching it to one ear. And this turned out to be a very critical element. If we always hold the phone next to this ear, then the likelihood increases that on this side we will get the tumor. These are the details, I don't know if you're interested in this, of how we analyze the statistics. So one of the authors of this paper is a biostatistician, a professor of the Łódź University. So we included this pro forma so that we would have a very precise analysis, and this is why we identified the research in which homogeneous results were obtained, because that proves that there is a scientific link. And if there was a heterogeneous study and there still was statistical significance, this means that the significance is very high. We used two types, that is a fixed effect model if the P was higher, and a random effect model if the P was below 0.05. This is only information for statisticians. What results did we get? When we compared all types of carcinomas and the use of all types of mobile phones, it turned out that there was no significant increase in the risk. So, if we dumped all carcinomas into one bag and all types of mobile phones into the same bag, then we didn't see any significant relationship. This means that the studies that dealt with this subject did not indicate an increase in prevalence. A similar situation occurred when we took into account all types of tumors and analog phones. Even though the risk here was above 1, however, if the confidence interval is below 1, then this means that the relationship is not significant, or there is no significant dependence. Gliomas and the use of any kind of mobile phone, no increased risk. Meningiomas and the use of mobile phones, regardless of type, also no significant risk. In the case of the oral neuroma, that risk was once again similar to the risk in general population. But here we have a very interesting observation. All types of tumors and the use of mobile phones for a period of 10 years or more. And then the risk is significantly higher, so it has increased by about 50% compared to the risk of a person who is not using a mobile phone. So this is the first very significant result. Then, if we take into account all types of phones, and even this very imprecise definition of exposure, actually in the previous one it was so imprecise, whereas here, and we already had significance, whereas here we have a specific definition of the time over which a mobile phone was used, and you can see there is a significant relationship between the use of mobile phone and various types of tumors. So we are not orienting ourselves to one type of tumor, but we are analyzing all types of tumors. Whatever cancer appears in connection with the mobile phone, it forms a part of this risk. Then we have all types of tumors and the use of mobile phones if in ipsilateral exposure. So this is for users who always hold their phone to the same ear. And here you can see that the risk of cancer increases by as much as 30%. So maybe we should pay attention to this, that you should not always put the phone next to the same ear. And now, if you wanted to compare this result with the results of previous meta-analyses, you will see that the first meta-analysis published in 2006, there the period of mobile phone use was between 2 and 5 years, and there was no relationship found between cancer and any type of mobile phones. The next study was about users who had used those mobile phones for over 10 years, and for glioma there was a significant relationship, significant dependency, but only if the use was ipsilateral. Oral neuroma, there was a significant relationship regardless of how it was used. For meningioma, there was no significant relationship. The next, exposure. You can see that the significance is increasing the later the research is published. So in reality, the longer the period over which the phones were used. Here they were only checking cases of glioma, and they found significant dependency. Myung also found a significant association for all tumors, and for Lewis also for glioma, but only for ipsilateral side. And please note that all of these studies concerned patients who had been using mobile phones for over 10 years. Not all of those cross-section or review research papers fulfilled the criteria of the meta-analysis. Some of them were just a collective analysis or some kind of a summary, but they also lead to very many significant conclusions. I have to tell you that Hardell and his team, those are Swedes. I believe they have done the most research. This was an interdisciplinary group that included EMF specialists and oncologists and public health specialists. So very many very significant papers from this team. And please note that Here it's about using mobile phones for over 10 years, and the glioma risk is not, 1. It's not 30%. Here we've got a 3 times higher risk compared to those who have not used mobile phones for such a long time. But there is another observation. They also proved, I believe they were the first, who proved that using cordless phones is also not health neutral. And the fact that some authors included the users of cordless phones in the control group may have been the reason for this lack of differences, because both phones emit fields. Although the cordless phone emits fields at a lower intensity, but it does emit something and thus elevates the risk. And so what now? This is important in the context of this message that we are paying a lot of attention to children. Use of mobile phones before the age of 20 and the risk of astrocytoma, that's a very malignant tumor, that risk increases 5-fold. This is a really concerning result. But using a cordless phone before the age of 20 is also not health neutral, because here the risk increases 4 times. And now, what is also very significant is the length of use of the mobile phone. Because if someone's been using it for up to 5 years, then we see no relationship, but if someone has used it for 10 years, then we do. And the same team developed this limit, that is the lifetime dose of talk time hours. So how many hours they use the mobile phone in their life. So for those people who have been using it so intensely compared to people whose lifetime dose was 1,000 hours, the risk was 5 times greater for analog phones and almost 4 times greater for digital, for GSM phones. Another cross-section analysis, one of the newest, has been put together by Morgan et al. And this included research from France. This was a project, Serena, that was carried out by Courant and his co-workers. The results were published in 2014, and those were case control studies. And what very interesting conclusion did they draw? The risk grew significantly as the time of talk increased, daily, monthly, and yearly time, the number of calls per day, and the cumulative duration of calls. And you can see that as this length of use grows by every next year, the risk of glioma increases. So what conclusions can we draw from this? Well, primarily that our analysis and many other meta-analyses, or the majority of them, and the original studies that were the basis for those meta-analyses and review or cross-section studies that were aimed at assessing the link between the use of mobile phones and the development of intracranial tumors, they indicate that there is a significant increase in the risk of tumors occurring in people who started using mobile phones before they were 20, have a long period of using a mobile phone, who talk a lot and for a long time, and who always hold the phone on the same side of their head. So those conclusions can be a direct recommendation for us for what to avoid when you use mobile phones. Yes, because you have to use mobile phones, but what should you avoid? The professor has stated that this was included in the group 2B carcinogens, which is the group of possibly carcinogenic, but scientists are now saying that they should be reclassified to group 2A, that is probable carcinogens, because more and more research papers are showing that this risk is increasing. These are conclusions that I wrote even before you got the materials and before I saw that you have already published this, but of course those are important things, and I have to tell you that when I look for data on tumors in children and their association with mobile phones, well, this research is only beginning, and it's obvious that in the case of children, this seniority, this length of use is too short to find this association. But the prospective research, so if we were to establish a cohort and observe this cohort and follow the frequency of use of mobile phones by children, would definitely bring a lot of important conclusions which could then be used, among other things, in education, because we have to start educating consumers by beginning with children and their parents. Let me just remind you of this commercial that was in our media, where a little child, where an infant is lying in bed, and their mother, instead of reading them a book, puts a mobile phone next to the child's head, and that mobile phone is playing this audio story. So that is definitely the wrong thing to do.